what we experienced at Antioch.
I was impelled to join in the student movement, where kids my age were taking matters into their own hands and laying down their lives, and it was thrilling to me. It was really exciting.
But they were out to kill us, and they did. They killed something like 40 of us.
So here is a person, an average student at Antioch, not so average in law school, I did a little bit better than average, and I was able to change the world.
And we had people coming down in trucks with guns after us, and we were scared and nervous.
We, meaning my generation of students, ended official segregation. We ended U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, and we put an end to the presidency of Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Helped to shape what we are now.
Senator Eastland gave a speech about Joni and I on a Senate floor, talking about that we were communists leading the movement. And this made the papers in Mississippi and Georgia, of course. Very scary time for us, because at least in Mississippi, I don't know, in Georgia, Mississippi, my picture was in the paper about being a communist, leading the Mississippi movement there. I was afraid to go outside, and I didn't go outside for about a week.
And yes, I also was denounced on the floor of Congress. Senator Murphy didn't like me, so he called me all sorts of names too. So I share that with people on the panel.
I was driving from Greenwood, Mississippi to Holly Springs, Mississippi, with 5 black guys, myself. Jesse Harris, Jesse Davis, Lafayette Cerny, remember these people? Doug Smith, and Douglas MacArthur Cotton, and myself. In my 1960 Lark Studebaker. We were packed in there. And it was at night. We're talking dark in Mississippi. And the car died in Belzoni, Mississippi, halfway between Greenwood and Holly Springs, going north. It died outside of town. And it was about 11 o'clock at night. Nothing for it but to push that car into town on a country road. Push this thing into the only place open in Belzoni, Mississippi, which was the gas station. And these other guys, some of whom were my bosses, as a matter of fact, on the project, started to shuffle, and say, well, Mr. Larry, glad we could be of help, and started to shuffle. I said, what? What do you think? And they said, look over there, and the white owner of the gas station was coming over, see? So they were doing what you do in Mississippi if you're black in the middle of the night and you don't want to live. And I said, oh yeah, well, thank you, boys, and here's a quarter for your troubles. And I told the gas station attendant he had to fix the car overnight. I said, my daddy owns some land around here, and I'll just wander on off to his land, and I'll be back in the morning. And they wandered off. We did not know where we were going or what we were doing. We couldn't do it together. I was by myself on a country road in the middle of the delta of Mississippi, outside of Belzoni. I'm walking along the road. I had not the foggiest notion what I was going to do. I was scared. Figured I'd just try to sleep on the field that night. Cop drives up. Stops me, what are you doing here? I explained to him that my daddy owns some land in Atlanta. Changed it to Atlanta. And I was just coming down to visit some people. Said, get in the car. He said, weren't you with a bunch of black boys over there? I said, yeah, my car broke down and they stopped to help me. They must be from around here. Cop drives a little ways and picks up, I think it was Doug Smith, walking by himself, also in trouble. Same as me, doesn't know where to go, what to do. Cop says, how'd you hook up with this guy? He says, well, I was hitchhiking and he picked me up. We're driving, he picks up a third guy and he says, what are you guys up to? And he says, well, he drove me down from Greenwood because we did not have our act together. They haul us into jail. Now, we're used to this, to tell you the truth. I've been in jail, I don't know how many times up to that. This was a little bit different, though. They lined us up all on a straight road, and they surrounded us in the jail, in the office of the sheriff. They gathered us all together. And they were slapping their hands with blackjacks, talking about how they're going to, we haven't killed us a nigger down here in a long time, we haven't hung us a heave in a long time, all like this. And they asked me the same question every time I'm arrested. They ask me, are you white or are you a nigger? Well, I learned to say I'm a nigger because I didn't want to get put in with the whites in the jail. And they figured that no white guy would say that, because it'd be too humiliating. I always said it. And it worked. They figured if I was nutty enough to say that I was nutty enough to be put into the black section, which saved my life. Kept an overnight. Ended up, we were charged with breaking into a clothing store. We were literally charged with stealing the shirts that we were wearing because we couldn't produce the sales slips. That happened quite a bit. Charged with things like that. Next day, we were investigated by the State Sovereignty Commission, who came in and interviewed us and so forth. The point I'm trying to make is that this kind of thing happened over and over and over again. And if it didn't happen one day, you're pretty sure it's going to happen the next. You lived with fear, and that resulted in tension and stress. Very serious, serious problem.
I was a business type with a conscience through Antioch. I was a business major. And sure enough, by the way, most of my friends will tell you that I never changed when I was at Antioch. I came in the same and I left the same. I always wanted to make money. And P.S. I am making money. Okay? I'm a tax lawyer. I represent the rich. I steal from Uncle Sam. That's my conscience. All right? And I take from the rich and put it in my pocket. All right? Enough said. It's true. I live in Scarsdale, 6-bedroom house. I'm a landlord. I can give you the whole bit.
I was raised by socialist parents who taught me a belief in civil rights, in justice, and in equality of all human beings. And I was horrified at what was happening to students and to black people in the name of law and order in the South. And I went because I was fortunate enough to have parents who supported and encouraged my decisions, and I was fortunate enough to be an Antioch student at a school where life experience, where exploration and experimentation and social action, and where revolutionary action was valued and encouraged.
I don't think I would have gone through any of the experiences that I've had in the last 25 years if I had not come to this school and met some amazing people very quickly. One in particular who had a lasting impact on me was Eleanor Holmes, a woman who, at that time, when I was a first-year student at Antioch, she was in her last year. She was the head of a little discussion group, Socialist Discussion Club of Antioch, I think it was called. Very modest organization. And this was back in the 50s, the Eisenhower years, before the civil rights movement had emerged. And what we learned in that experience of sitting around in this campus, in the C shop, dormitories, North Hall Common Room, was the fact that we had to begin to translate our commitment into some kind of action. Eleanor went on to translate her commitment into a career in advancing civil rights. She did so through the profession of law. Now, I don't think I went to law school because of her example, but at least there was planted at that time a very deep-rooted seed. Antioch is a place that fosters commitment to ideals and values and tries to nurture them through the development of skills that can effectively turn those values into action.
One person with courage can make a majority. And there can be no doubt that people can change this world in which we live in their own lifetimes.
In 1963, after my first quarter at Antioch, I had my opportunity to go to Prince Edward County in Farmville, Virginia. This was the place where they had established in 1963 the free schools. This was where there was no school for blacks for 4 entire years. I wanted to give you a little bit of history of this. It was very exciting in terms of what got this to be the case that NAACP backed for desegregation. It started with a high school strike of black students. This had never been done. This was in 1951 and was extremely powerful. These students said they would stay out of school until they got a decent high school. Desegregation was not the issue. The issue at hand was that they just wanted a decent place to live and learn and study. They were living and studying. They had to commute. They had the second-hand buses. They were studying in these little tar-shacked paper shacks that people thought were chicken coops out on the road. And people were really upset. They got sick. They couldn't come to school because it was so unhealthy. They had the kind of pot-boil stoves where you put the wood in, and if you're next to it, you're broiling, and if you're away from it, you're freezing, and the roof's stripped. So we're talking about a lot of sick kids, as we all know. Through this, the NAACP picked up this case in 1954. It was extremely exciting. And so you started to see the defenders movement of white people come in. Now, the defenders movement was well based in Prince Edward County because you had seen the last of the Civil War fought there, you'd seen Reconstruction, and you had the assumption that public education was really not the right of everybody. It was brought by Reconstruction. A lot of people don't know that. They think that public education was accepted by everybody. A lot of people in the South were not for it, and they were definitely not for integrated schooling. They fought and fought and fought until 1958. You saw, I don't know if you all have seen pictures, those of you who didn't live through this era, of all the schools with chains across them and people not being able to go to school. This happened for about 6 or 7 months, but still the Prince Edward school systems were open and segregated. In 1959, they closed the schools completely. And because of this Defenders Committee that had been working very hard, they used state tuition grants and they raised money throughout the country for this segregated school. And so your white children went to school and went on to college, and your black students who could not get out of the county did not have education for 4 years. This is another type of violence for people, because those folks who were in high school never again would have the opportunity to recapture that education. They went into the workforce and they did not get back. In 1963, they finally established the free schools. There was a lot of National Educational Association money in it. There was a lot of Kennedy money. Imagine in 1963 the reaction when Kennedy was shot. That was in the fall. The whole place was just shaking. They thought the whole school would close again and they would never have it. It was a very depressed time. Around this whole time, they were totally dependent on Northern support. Finally, they had their school, and they had teachers from the North. They had both white teachers and black teachers. They had 3 students in that school system who were white, but you had an integrated faculty. And this is the school to which I came, and I, as an idealistic Antiochian, of course, was ready to participate in the classrooms, to tutor, and was all set to go. Well, I'd asked them to arrange my housing, so I went down, and the first thing I found out, I was living in the white community, although you had sporadic housing, so you had very mixed housing in some instances, but you had definite areas where blacks were not supposed to go, and certainly houses where they were not supposed to enter. So I found out the place that I had my room was not open to black people. So I was sort of surprised the school system had put me in there, but I eventually changed and lived with other people. I went to the school and I was all excited about my educational experience, and the next thing I found out was I'd been assigned to the elementary principal, and she wanted me to do odd typing jobs and to unpack books. Well, I wasn't very tolerant, and I wasn't very sophisticated, and I tried to be nonviolent, and I sure was angry, and I didn't have some of those skills to which you alluded in terms of how to deal with stress. So it was a hard time for me. I ended up living with two other women with whom I got along very well. We lived primarily in a black section. We paid about $35 rent a month for this house that had no seams in it, so it sort of slanted down. But it was a great place to live. The community in general was very friendly. So here I was trying to reconcile personally my experience with, feeling very good and positive about this project, and at the same time feeling I was definitely being discriminated against. I kept saying, can I do this? I've got these skills. And although they were minimal, I thought I could do something else. Eventually, I worked around it and got out and started to do different jobs. And although I didn't get near the classroom, because I think this was an honest interpretation of some of the educators, that unless you had your 4-year degree, you shouldn't go near the classroom. I did at least get to do more interesting tasks and did not have to rely on being a secretary.
Now, I want to put before you for discussion and thought later on today 3 principles that I think we have to keep in mind. The first is that skills are important, but commitment is essential. Without the commitment, the skills are useless. They are sold to the highest bidder. When I entered law school at Harvard, a poll was taken of my entering class. We were the elite of the country. 67% of us wanted to go into public service law. 2/3 of my class. 3 years later, after we had been run through the Harvard mill, the placement office issued a report. The 67% committed to public service law had dwindled to 1%. And they had been bought by the Wall Street law firms for $50,000 a year to start. All of those skills, which could have been translated, that would have been about 350 lawyers spread across the country, raising hell, was lost because the commitment to sustain that was not there. Second principle, tactics may change, but values are immutable. Tactics must change because conditions change. But how do we shape those values? We come to Antioch with values. But they become sharpened on reflection. I remember very well the process I went through with the help of Al Denman and Bob Friedman, 2 different ways in sharpening and clarifying the values I brought with me to Antioch in a way that I think has lasted, even though my tactics have changed. And the third principle, issues will change, but the basic goal will remain. The issue of today may be whether to ban Coca-Cola from the Antioch campus, or how best to divorce the college from any support for apartheid in South Africa, or how to stop the United States from crushing the revolution in Nicaragua. But the basic goal, the human rights goal, the civil rights goal, will remain.
So we've come a long way. And times not only change, people change, institutions change. But as teenagers and students, we have some decisions to make about our own lives and the lives of others, who we want to bring into our circle of friends, now and future associates. The world has greatly changed since the short time when I was a teenager at Antioch. In the field of civil rights, the world has turned 180 degrees and then circled again. So that in the 1980s, we are in a new struggle about the very definition of equality and civil rights, of sexual freedom, freedom of choice, comparable worth, affirmative action. In the 1960s, the movement was away from ghettos and segregated institutions. We proclaimed that all public facilities, colleges, and governmental institutions had to be fully integrated. The purpose of the civil rights and the affirmative action laws was to get all institutions in the United States to face up to the responsibility of eliminating the vestiges of racism and sexism, to undo the legacy of discrimination and to disturb, yes, disturb the bastions of white male privilege. Urban rioting and black revolution seared the souls of white folk, and there was a period of tremendous upheaval and social change. Colleges recast their exclusionary admissions policies and practices, and the courts required employment tests to be job-related. And so blacks and women got more work.
The 60s was an intense time, and a complex time, and a revolutionary time. Was it worth it? I must respond to that a resounding yes. For people in the South, there was tremendous strides made. There's no more legal segregation. There are laws now to fight discrimination. There are many more job opportunities. And there is political power being taken by black people all over the South. As Peter mentioned, there are many, many more black people registered in the South than there were in the 60s now to vote. And there are hundreds of black people in political office, both on the local and also on the state level throughout the South. So while we haven't eradicated racism, many, many steps have been taken as a result of the student movements of the 60s. And for me personally, I would also say it was definitely worth it. I learned, in a small way, the hard reality of a system based on repression and hate. And I learned to live and work together under extreme hardship with people who were very different from myself, in a very deep movement for revolutionary change. And partly because of these experiences and because of my experiences at Antioch, I'm still active today. I'm currently working as an organizer for an anti-hunger movement in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I also work in electoral struggles and in the anti-apartheid movement as it's growing in Pittsburgh. So what does all this mean for students today? And I want to go back to what I said about how students were the motivating force of the civil rights movement. And students have been the motivating force of most revolutionary and social change movements of modern times. And I want to lay down a challenge to the students here. I challenge you to play some role in changing your environment for the better, in eradicating social injustice. There's plenty wrong in society today, and there's new student movements growing around a variety of issues. It's my responsibility and all of our responsibilities to take some action in our lifetime to be able to say, I made a difference. So I urge you to go somewhere and involve yourself in struggles, to meet the people struggling. Go visit Nicaragua and see them building a new society, even in the face of war by the United States. And I promise you, you'll be inspired. Go join Greenpeace or any of the anti-weapons movements in the United States and join one of their movements, and I guarantee you, you'll learn and get involved. Go visit a homeless shelter in a city in the United States or a migrant workers camp where people are still working and living as they did a decade ago, and I guarantee you, you will be changed. Antioch affords you the opportunity to take the initiative, to get involved, and to act on something you believe in. So I challenge you to learn firsthand about something you can feel passionately about, and then to act. Antioch gives you a chance to make a difference and to make this world a better place, and I challenge you to act.
You have to be committed to a side. You have to take a side. Don't you be the one that say we have to look at both sides of the issue. Maybe you do that when you're doing your planning. But in the end, you have to take a side. You have to be committed to something, to some group of people. Or else society doesn't work. There's so many people running around saying, oh, I'm not liberal, I'm not conservative. It's the thing to say today, especially in Washington, which is where I live. These labels are meaningless. Or, you know, let's look at all sides of the issue. Where things are so complex today, who knows what to do? If that continues, we're going to stay in the mess that we're in. You have to be committed to a side. Even if that side, from time to time, doesn't do things exactly the way you would like them. Now, you also have to continually, I think, investigate your commitment, and you have to have limits, and if the side that you're on goes beyond your limits, then you're no longer on their side. It goes back to this thing about my country right or wrong. You know, people, the reactionary use that a lot. But there's something very true in that. But the last part of that is my country right or wrong, something about if it's right, fight for it. I forget exactly, but the last part of it is if it's wrong, to make it right. You have to be committed to something enough to stick with it, to try to work to make it right. And let me tell you something. This is not just theoretical stuff. I'm talking to the students here today. You today face many more problems than we did in the 60s. You're going to go out in the world, unless there's some major changes between now and when you graduate, which I doubt. You're going to go out into a world where jobs are going to be very scarce, where a lot of what you're learning at Antioch is not going to be easily turned into what you need to live. And they're out to kill you today with these wars. Not us, we're past it. I'm talking to the students here in Central America. If you don't do something about it, you are going to be hurt. And there's many ways to approach those two very direct issues that directly concern students, war and jobs. They're all interconnected. There's environmental issues, there's those various issues that we named. But remember, you're fighting for yourself, for those two things.
Yes, that's what I'm going to ask you to do. You really have to put it on the line. If you believe in it, then you have to do it. You just can't sit back and say, guess what, I'll let someone else do it. The world won't change that way. You've got to put it on the line. And if you're afraid to put it on the line or you don't want to put it on the line, well, that's okay. I mean, there's a lot of people out there. As a matter of fact, that's the majority. But if you want to do something, and by the way, now we get a little into the scholastic life, my kids trot out Daddy. And when we start discussing civil rights, they can bring Daddy to school and say, Daddy was involved in the civil rights movement. And that gives me a great deal of pride. That they can say, my children can say, their father did change the world.
So the issue at stake in the current malaise in the civil rights movement is how far are we prepared to go to assert our intellects and our humanity over parochialism and prejudice, unless we as individuals, as human beings, are prepared to go all the way to reshape every institution in the image of sanity as opposed to insanity. There just will not be the vanguard of intelligent leadership to change our world. In 1971, I suggested in an article in the Antiochian that Antioch was on the decline, that it was no longer unique, that it was no longer unfashionable to the extent that it would bring students from all over the country who could find in its educational purposes a feeling of strength and integrity of purpose. In 1985, I am prepared to say that Antioch can reclaim its heritage. It can be unique. It can provide and supply the special function of education, which is to broaden one's horizons, to extirpate prejudice, and to prepare our young people to change the order of things. The question of education is not whether it is black or white. The question for education today is whether it is relevant or irrelevant.
And I want to tell a little story about an exemplar from a historical perspective. Naturally, he was a lawyer. My exemplars are now lawyers. He was a graduate of Litchfield Law Academy, the first law school in this country, which trained 6 members of the Supreme Court. It's older than Harvard Law School. And he was assigned to a case in Washington, D.C. because the defendants could not raise the $1,000 to hire Daniel Webster to defend them. This lawyer had not practiced law for 20 years. He hadn't been in a criminal case for a long time, but nobody else would do it. His clients were 2 men who were charged with violating the fugitive slave law. What they had done was to rent a boat, a little schooner called the Pearl. Word passed through the slave quarters of Washington, D.C. that they could escape to the north on the Pearl. And 76 men, women, and children came down one night and got on the boat. The report of this says, frightened and not knowing what would happen next, they peered into the dark and caught sight of the face of a friendly white man with a ship's lantern who helped them climb down into the hold, where he told them to lie down on a floor littered with chips and bark from the previous cargo of cordwood. Mothers held their small children, several half moaning, half singing prayers. Finally, they were all in, packed together side by side as their ancestors had once been stowed coming to the New World on a slave ship. They now hoped to escape to freedom. At midnight, with 76 passengers, Captain Daniel Drayton and Edward Sayers cast off their lines and headed down the river. But they were caught. They had been informed on. They were charged with 345 violations of the Fugitive Slave Act. The federal prosecutor, the son of Francis Scott Key, wrote our national anthem, demanded a sentence of 800 years in prison for Drayton and Sayers. The judge was hostile. The jury was picked from the bar next door to the courthouse. And the lawyer who reluctantly agreed to defend them went through the futility of arguing that they had not stolen the slaves, but simply provided a means of escape. And he did something which actually is a very clever trick for a lawyer. He held up a newspaper clipping and read from it, quoting, "The age of tyrants and slavery is rapidly drawing to a close, and that happy period to be signaled by the universal emancipation of man from the fetters of oppression and the recognition in all countries of the great principles of popular sovereignty, equality, and brotherhood." And the judge cautioned him against this inflammatory language. We have institutions that may be endangered by it, he says. And the prosecutor made the mistake of jumping up and said, "Who wrote that anyway?" And the lawyer said, "That was from Senator Henry Foote of Mississippi on the occasion of the French independence celebration." But his client was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison, later pardoned by the president. This lawyer, my exemplar, took on a struggle that was very unpopular at the time and lost in the short run. He later made his last speech in public, about 10 years later. And he made it right here, in this building. And that was Horace Mann. So, on the occasion of Horace Mann Day, I commend to you the story of a man who took on an impossible, unpopular task because he believed, as he said in that last speech in this building, to the graduates of Antioch College in 1859. Words which we all know. So, in the infinitely nobler battle in which you were engaged against error and wrong, if you are ever repulsed or stricken down, may you always be solaced and cheered by the exulting cry of triumph over some abuse in church or state, some vice or folly in society, some false opinion or cruelty which you have overcome. And I beseech you to treasure up in your hearts these my parting words. Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Thank you.